This is the fifth lesson in the Laughing Frog Pottery online throwing course. And today I'm going to look at different ways I open up the ball of clay when I first start throwing. So I'm looking at different ways that, the different ways that I use my hands to open up for a cylinder, for a bowl, and for a flat thing like a plate. When I'm throwing, I try to use essentially the same actions for each form that I'm making, modified as is required for that particular form. So first off, I'm going to open up for a cylinder. This is a mug that's about 500 grams. So once I've got the ball of clay centered, the way I open up for a mug is to come down with my hand like, so my fingers are almost not horizontal, but they're at a 45-degree angle to the wheel head, so that I'm opening up in a shallow V of clay. And the reason I do that is because it actually means that I'm providing a greater pressure over a wider area of clay. And I think that that's relevant because it helps to cut down on the S-cracking that might occur in the object. So with the model I work on is that clay particles are like the sort of shaped like your hand a bit. And what makes clay plastic is that the water between those clay platelets allows it to slide. The clay platelets are held together by an ionic attraction, and so you've got this sliding. But in a ball of clay, everything's not in the same angle. You've got you've got little clumps that are like that, like that, like that. So all differently arranged in the actual plastic clay. However, when you apply a pressure, so if I apply a pressure downwards, there is a greater inclination for the clay to flatten into that kind of position, so that your clay is flattening perpendicular to the applied pressure, the platelets within the clay are. And what that means is that you've got a multitude more layers of water in that dimension than you do in the horizontal dimension. So the sort of rule of thumb that I have is that clay shrinks more in the direction of an applied pressure. So if I'm applying a pressure that way, or across the base, so like I'm drawing the clay out, I'm actually tending to align the clay particles more like this around that's the center of the wheelhead. And in a sense, that's going to encourage a greater shrinkage across the base, which is what we don't want. What I want to do is to encourage the greatest shrinkage to be in the vertical surface, the vertical direction, because that's the thinner direction in a normal situation. So if the shrinkage is greater that way and less that way, then I'll get fewer S-cracks. So I open up with my hand at that almost 45-degree angle. I've seen other people doing it like this, like that. I don't tend to use my thumb because then I've only got a very small area of compression going downwards, and I think that is more likely to cause S-cracks. So then I've opened up down to the bottom and I draw that clay quickly back. I tend not to rework the base very much. I just run my thumb across from the center to 9 o'clock if I'm thinking of it as a clock face, and that gives me the base essentially finished. If you've watched my other video, you'll see that I then put my finger there. I can recenter the clay and lift the clay up. to form a mug or whatever it is that I'm throwing. So the second form I'm going to throw is a bowl, and you'll see that I open up significantly differently for that. So when I'm opening up a ball of clay for a bowl, I use this section of my hand there, which is the hypothenar, and that's going to be essentially on the radius. So it's going to go from the centre to the outside of the ball of clay. My hand, with the clay going this way, it's my right hand that I use. If the wheel was going the other way around, I'd have to use my left hand, because that way the clay is passing under the blade of my hand there. So I brace my right hand with my left hand and I'm pushing downwards. So my left hand's not really doing much against the outside of the clay. It's just stabilising my right hand, and I'm pushing downwards in a broad sort of sweep. I don't know if it's years of bending my hand that way, but I seem to be able to generate quite a nice curve. It means that I've got a curve to start the bowl off with, rather than having to work from a flat base and trying to get it to look like a curve. So, and that's a really simple way of opening up for a bowl, and it gives really good compression across the base. So I very, very rarely get S-cracks in a bowl. So once I've done that, I'm going to use my left hand I can re-centre that clay, my thumb's down against the wheel head, my fingertips are here, my index fingers on the surface of the clay on the inside, and I can push in against that wheel head, lift that clay up to narrow the base down to about the size I want the final foot ring to be, and then pinch that clay upwards. So when I'm throwing a bowl, I'm working in front of myself. If it's a clock face, I'm working at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, rather than working over at 3 o'clock. And then I draw my hand up the bowl so that my fingertips I keep describing as though my fingertips are heading towards my wrist, avoiding that kind of a downward pressure. So the next thing I'm going to do is to throw another bowl, but with a much larger ball of clay. The bowl I just threw was about just on 1 kilo, and this one's 2.5 kilos. So with a larger ball of clay, I could still use the hypothenar working from the middle downwards, but it's more physical work and it's harder on my hand. And so to do something like that, open up something like this, I'm going to use that section of my hand there, on the more or less on the side that the clay is coming towards me, so on the left side, and I'm going to just push downwards. So you can see that it's going from the thenar across to the hypothenar using that broad section of my hand there. Now I find because I can get my shoulder weight onto it, it's a much more powerful position, but it's not as controlled. So I'm more likely to have trouble with the thickness of the clay at the base. So when I'm doing that, I'm more often testing the base for with the needle tin to see how I'm going there. With a larger piece of clay like this, I can recenter that without using the sponge, but using the hypothenar of my right hand over that rim, pushing downwards and applying a bit of pressure. But I still find it more convenient when I'm lifting to use the sponge over that rim. So I'm pushing inwards with my left thumb, lifting that clay up off the wheel head, and letting it slide through my fingers. Essentially, so my hands are essentially in that position of being at 5:30 or 6 o'clock on the clock face. So you can see that powerful sort of use of the weight of the shoulder draws that clay open very easily, and it's giving really good compression to the bottom of it, and not very likely to get S-cracks in a piece like this. The final opening up technique I want to show you is what I use for opening up for a dinner plate. I did a 3-year apprenticeship with a potter called Doug Alexander, and Doug always used to use 1.75 kilos for a standard dinner plate, and I use between 1.75 and 2 kilos, depending on the size of the plate. So a normal plate would be about 280 up to 300 mils, so 28 centimetres to 30 centimetres. So again, I'm going to use the hypothenar section of my right hand to open this clay out. And basically, I'm going to use my left hand to control my right hand and give me the rigidity through the body to do that. So I'm going to start by just pushing downwards. And as I push downwards, I generate a small rim of clay, which will be become the rim of the plate. And then I'm going to use my right hand controlled by my left hand, and I'm going to draw it back. So that the way I describe it is I'm drawing it back towards my elbow. I'm not coming this way, which will put a swirl down the pot. I'm drawing it that way towards my elbow, so that the hypothenars are remaining perpendicular to the oncoming clay. Someone once said that dinner plate's the easiest thing to throw because all you've got to do is flatten a bit of clay across the back and you've got a plate. There's a certain truth in that. It's the turning that's harder. So now I've got a base that's drawn across, and I've got a quantity of clay there that I can use to generate the rim. So in a sense, the process I've done is the same as for throwing a cylinder. I've made a flat base, and I've now got a rim that I can recenter. So my thumb of my left hand on the outside, index finger there, and in this case a sponge stretched across that. Then I'll just pinch between my thumb and finger to generate the curvetto, the curved section at the bottom of the plate. And now I've got sort of a ring of clay on a thinner section of clay there. So I'm just going to pinch this ring of clay in a slightly different direction to generate a flange.